Hi, and welcome to this week's graduate case study. I'm Dr. Rebecca Troy, owner and founder of Retrain the Dyslexic Brain. And what we think is super exciting and really encouraging for parents of children with dyslexia is to share what is possible within a relatively short period of time. And so if you're new here, welcome. Every other week we are on live sharing these case studies with you because it's truly inspirational to see what's possible through the power of neuroplasticity and a really good system and structure, especially if you and your child have been struggling to make progress for years. It can be really, really refreshing to hear about cases like this that have absolutely made tremendous progress in a short period of time. So today we are going to be reviewing Jay and his mother, Kate. Jay was 9 in the time that he was with us. He just recently turned 10, but for the 5 months that he was in the program, he was 9. And so just a quick overview of his data before we really dive in. He went from being 64% accurate in his phonological awareness, which we'll dive into in a bit, to 90% accurate. His reading score on the Wide Range Achievement Test 5 went from the 14th percentile to the 79th percentile. His spelling from the 7th to the 39th, and he was in the program for 5 months. So just absolutely massive gains, which we'll talk about momentarily. But I think something very positive is that Jay did not have any interest in reading whatsoever before he started in the program. And now, he's saying things like reading wasn't fun before and now it is. So he was not reading at all on his own to now picking out a book from the library, reading 4 chapters over lunch without any prodding from his mom. She said, "Oh my, it's absolutely such a relief." And then a quote from his mom, "I'm grateful to be able to give him the best chance to do what he wants to do with his life." So if you are brand new here and you're wondering who we are and what we're all about, we do employ families with cutting edge neuroscience techniques in order to reorganize how the child's brain is hearing and responding to language. And I'll show you in just a minute some of the differences in the dyslexic brain that make it unique from other brains. And when you help the brain to respond differently, you can make reading and spelling exponentially improved within just a few months. And so this creates massive increases in confidence and independence, and also significant improvement in reading and spelling scores, which is what we want. So what's awesome about all of this is that everything that I'm about to share was done by Jay's mother, Kate, who has 0 background in education. She's a physician's assistant and she loves her son. And so in 10 to 15 minutes a day, she worked with him using our system and receiving our coaching to get these results for her son. So without further ado, let's dive in and first start with a deeper understanding of dyslexia. I think this is just really important that you fundamentally understand what's going on and why this treatment is so effective. So on the right of your screen there, you'll see an fMRI image of 2 brains. The one on the left is a person without dyslexia, and the one on the right is a person with dyslexia. And so what you'll notice is that there are some differences in how the brain is processing, and this is during a language task. So for example, somebody might have said, read this word or write this sentence or try to rhyme these sounds. And this is what would happen typically for the brain of somebody on the left without dyslexia. You'll notice that there's activation in the back here in what's called the occipital lobe, where vision is controlled. And then there's also activity here in the parietal temporal lobes where the auditory components of language are really housed. And so it's this symbiotic relationship between sight and sound that allows us as a reader to be able to decode the words in front of us, to be able to spell and accurately use the right letters, to be able to do things like rhyming or remembering sequences of words. But when you look at the person on the right with dyslexia, you'll notice that there isn't activity back here in this occipital lobe, which means that oftentimes when that language comes in, the eye sees it, but the brain doesn't really know what to do with that information, which is why sometimes when you're spelling, you can add letters that are inappropriate, or you can skip letters that should have been there, or you might be reading along and you see the word the, and two lines later, that same image comes in and hits the back of your brain, and it's like it's never seen it before. It doesn't know what to do. And that's because the brain isn't consistently firing for language in the way that a typical reader would. And so here's another way to look at this same concept, this time in EEGs. So again, we see that in the back of the brain and in the sides and the parietal temporal lobes, there's activity. Again, the reader with dyslexia who does not. But the thing that's so powerful for you and empowering as a parent to know is that the brain is dynamic and it has the ability and the capacity to change over a lifetime. So what we know through imaging and science is that the brain is not fixed like we once thought it was. There was a time when people thought that intelligence and IQ were a fixed thing. And we know now through many studies that the brain changes depending on what we do and how we use it. So an example is, a study of London cab drivers before and after they got their job. So as a part of being a London cab driver, you have to take a test and memorize a map of the city. And, they're not perpendicular lines always. Those things are curved and they're kind of short and they connect in funny ways between streets. And so making a visual map in the brain is absolutely essential in order to do that job and do it well. And so they measured the brain of these cab drivers before they started their job and after, and they found that they had much more spatial reasoning capacity after doing that job. So again, just more evidence that the brain does change depending on what we do with it. And so it is absolutely possible to take areas of the brain that really were not responding to language and cause them to start responding to language, which is why we can have these massive shifts in data from pre to post in just a couple of months. So let's dive into the real story here, which is where I think that these case studies are just so much fun because they are not just numbers. These are real people and real lives that we get to share about. So this is all from an interview from Jay's mom, Kate. And so as she started sharing, we just captured some of the highlights because it's possible that you can see yourself in some of these stories and say like, oh my goodness, that's me too. So Jay was homeschooled until he was in the second grade, and he's the oldest child in his family, which means that mom didn't really know what it looked like to teach somebody to read. So she said, yes, learning letters took a while, but because he was her first child, she didn't really realize until her second son that things were such a struggle. So by the time he made it to second grade, he had officially gotten a dyslexia and severe dysgraphia diagnosis, and he went to a Montessori school. And at that time, they recognized that he was struggling, so they created him an Orton Gillingham based program that he worked on his own daily at school. Mom said she could tell he wasn't quite on track. He did not like books, and they are such a family of readers, which was challenging. He loves audiobooks, has really great comprehension, but it was such a struggle for him to want to pick up a book on his own and read. She said he wouldn't read at all, and that just made me really sad. So they tried all different kinds of things, different programs, different workbooks, many different methods to get him reading. And she said, the kind of catalyst that caused us to meet was that his fourth grade teacher pulled her aside and was more concerned than she had ever heard before. So she really honed in on kids that needed help, but she was concerned about his ability to keep up with the material. So whether you know about Montessori environment or not, there are a lot of stations and kids are moving around the classroom frequently doing different things. And so it does require some level of independence to engage in the material. And so he was being asked to independently engage with reading, and he just really wasn't able to at all. So what they had done so far for intervention hadn't boosted him enough to be able to read on his own. So they had tried all about reading curriculum. He had done the first 3 levels of Barton curriculum, and she said he's a really bright kid, but we just did not have the right tools yet. So they didn't learn until after his diagnosis that dyslexia is actually in our family. It was just undiagnosed. So I think that's another important point to bring up, is that dyslexia is highly heritable. Anywhere between 50 and 84% of families see that there is another case in the family that may or may not have been diagnosed. So it's highly likely that if your child has dyslexia, that somewhere in there somebody else in your family does too, that you may or may not know about. So she said it was really overwhelming at first for her to receive that diagnosis because she didn't know a lot about it. So she did what most parents do as soon as they realize that their child is struggling with something, and she went to Google and she started asking all kinds of questions about dyslexia and what it means and what you should do about it. And she said she really remembers vividly this website that basically said you just need to accept it, and dyslexia is something that you can't do anything about. And she said for her, that was really contrary to her personality. I just believe, like most things in life, if you put in the time and the work, you can make significant gains. And so she was definitely a candidate for our program because in order to do this, you have to have this fundamental core belief that your child is capable of more. And so she said, I'm just going to trust, lean into it, not overthink it. I just tried to be all in. And she absolutely was. So I think here's the fun part of the story where we get to look at what changed for Jay. So if that's how things were before, what did life look like for him after those 5 months of intervention? So she did say that very honestly, I was worried that he wasn't going to work with me because the way that we support clients is that we're training you step by step what to do in 10 to 15 minutes a day. But she said, I didn't know if he was going to work with me, but 15 minutes a day always felt doable. So they set a timer and they did just kind of work until the timer was done. And that really helped them to stay consistent. And then, as time went on, they grew not to need that anymore because Jay could see that the fruits of his labor were starting to have an impact and the motivation was no longer required. But she said around module 6, he started picking up books and just reading them. One of my happiest moments was when I started seeing him pick up books for fun and just start reading. So even today, we went to the library and he just picked up a book and read 4 chapters over lunch without any prodding from me. And if you're a homeschool parent, how big of a deal that is, because often you are asking your child to do some things independently. And if your child is unable to read, now that onus is on you, and you're having to sit next to them the entire time and really support them in their learning. And so for him to be independently and on his own choosing to read has really, really lifted her level of responsibility in supporting him academically. And he's able to just kind of do those things now on his own, which is huge. She's celebrating that he's reading on grade level now. So he's choosing to read on his own. And even in the summer, he had been going to speech. And so during this recent speech eval, mom overheard the evaluator say to him, okay, so I'm going to do this test with you, and do you need me to read it to you, or do you want to read it yourself? And his response to her was, I'm a really great reader, I got this. Which was the delight. It was a delight for his mother to hear that. He said reading wasn't fun before, and now it is. And she reflected that was probably a lot to do with the fact that it was stressful and hard for him before. And now that that's been removed, he just feels totally differently about the experience. So she celebrated that. Jay does really have amazing spatial awareness, and he can build things that nobody else can build. So whether you know this or not, children with dyslexia actually have superpowers in their brain as well, whether it's added creativity or lateral thinking or spatial thinking. You know, there are some real gifts that the brain of a child with dyslexia has. And so what was fun for her is to see the genius that he had in some of his early puzzle opportunities that he was able to do, or like putting together these intricate models that were intended for 15-year-olds plus. And now his reading and spelling abilities can match and mirror his academic genius that he has in these other areas. So she said, really beautiful to see him kind of owning up to his true capacity. She said his handwriting really did improve. So something clicked for him. He has pretty profound dysgraphia, and he started writing without a lot of coaching. Even his teacher noticed and said, "What are you doing with his handwriting?" But overall, she said, as a mother, it was a huge relief. I had anxiety and fear about his transitioning from 5th to 6th grade. I know he's a few years from that. Just right now, he's going into 5th grade, but it's such a huge relief that he is where he is now. Seeing him read this summer was huge, because now he's doing what other kids are doing instead of getting further behind this summer. Like he was growing and learning just like everybody else. She said it was a gift, and I know he's going to be okay. And so there was that peace of mind from a mother's perspective. And then she said, there were also some unexpected gifts that came along with it too. So because their family is a family of readers, younger brother has been reading for a while, and so the two of them have similar interests and have now been bonding over books, which she said has been delightful to see. A lot of their family friends have children who like to read books, and so yes, he could talk about those from an audio version perspective, but to be able to actually read the books and talk about it with his friends has been socially very rewarding. She went into his classroom to do an observation, and during the time she was there, he jumped in and read aloud in front of the class. So just super encouraging to see that if you're given the right tools and you have the attitude that Jay does, you're going to be successful. She said Jay's a fighter. He has so much fortitude, and he doesn't give up. And I knew he wasn't going to give up on this either, but I'm so relieved that he's here. I'm grateful to be able to give him the best chance to do what he wants to do with his life. So just beautiful, beautiful transformational story. And I hope that resonates with you. I hope it inspires you, because that's a real little person whose life has been completely changed. So let's take a look at the data. Here's an overview snapshot. So we do 3 assessments in 3 different areas before starting the program. So phonological awareness at the start was 64% accurate. So that's a completely auditory test. Can you hear all of the sounds in the word? Can you pull this part out? Can you put these back together? And so his brain, as you can see, was just barely over 50% with that capacity. He ended 5 months later with 90% accuracy on that. Again, reading and spelling scores massively catapulted as a result. So we'll go over those in just a second. So when he did this initial phonological awareness assessment, he had 15 errors. By the time he was done, there were just 4. So nearly a perfect score, major changes in how his brain was able to hear all of the sounds and words, manipulate those, put them back together, which is so foundational to both reading and spelling. And so before we dive into his reading and spelling data, I don't know how long it's been since you've had a course on statistics, but let me just kind of review some of this with you so you understand what you're looking at and why we think that this is such a big deal. So this is called the normal distribution curve. And right in the middle, where that big red line is the 50th percentile, or what we would consider average. So when children are in an academic school year, we expect them to grow. And the growth that they've studied to say this is what average growth is, John Hattie specifically studied this, is 0.3 of a standard deviation. So to go from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 2, or from 2 to 3 is what's called a standard deviation of growth. So if you're in first grade, for example, and you're in there and you're working hard all year long, it's expected that you would go from the red line to the blue line in an academic year, a 0.3 of a standard deviation. Now, what happens a lot for children with dyslexia is they'll either make that progress or less in an academic year, which is why it feels like you're just spinning without much change or progress. And so what is important for you as a parent is to select an intervention that is going to have a massive, statistically significant difference in your child's performance. You want them to move a lot. So to go from the red line to the green line is what we would consider moderate statistical significance. To go from the red line to the orange line is statistically significant effects. So that's what we would consider a 0.8 or higher. So let's talk about what that means as it pertains to Jay. So as you can see in this red dot right here, that's Jay's reading score at the beginning of the course, which was at the 14th percentile. Now, in an average school year, he would have grown to the yellow, which is that 0.3 of a standard deviation. If this intervention had a statistically significant effect on him, meaning that it was statistically known that this was a positive intervention for him, he would have gone to the brown. Instead, he went a full standard deviation above that to the green at the 79th percentile. So just absolutely massive, massive statistical growth in a 5-month period. So we look at spelling, similar picture here. So spelling typically develops a little bit more slowly than reading. We would expect that, but also amazing gains here. So started at the 7th percentile, again, through an entire academic year. Typical growth would have been to that yellow. Statistically significant growth would have been to the brown. He went another entire standard deviation above that to the green to end the course at the 39th percentile. So I think, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but having an intervention that closes the gap between the child and their peers is critical. So I think it's important that in every one of these case studies, we really celebrate the parent that showed up to do the work. So as I mentioned earlier, none of this would be possible if we didn't have this partnership with mom. So as I said, mom's physician assistant, no education background, no background in reading, not a reading specialist. She's a caring mom that showed up. She remained consistent to the program. She was consistent with the exercises. So for 5 months, she was committed to 10 to 15 minutes a day. She trusted the process. She showed up to the accountability and support calls that we provided her with. She recognized that her mindset impacted her son, and she was willing to get coaching and support to show up as her best self. And she wasn't willing to give up on her son, even when she had received information from websites and books that told her that this struggle was going to be forever. She was his advocate. And she raised the bar and said, that's not good enough for my brilliant son. He deserves more. He's capable of more. And I'm willing to learn what I have to learn and do what I have to do. 10 to 15 minutes a day, no big deal if it means that my son is going to have a different shot at life. So, a quote that she had given us that I just loved is that, I just believe, like in most things in life, if you put in the time and the work, you can make significant gains with the right tools. So just want to celebrate her for showing up, because again, if she wouldn't have believed in his capacity and she had just accepted that this was going to be the way that it was for Jay, he would not be here in this place right now. So super celebrating Mom Kate. Then I think it's also really powerful to celebrate the system. So I think it says something when you get data that time after time, again and again, variable after variable is thrown into this, and we're still getting statistically significant growth for all of the clients. So again, when you look at this, this is the blue, the average amount of growth that a child would make in an entire school year. If the intervention that you're using is statistically significant, meaning that it's having a very positive impact on the child. And then here's our average client growth, which is double that. And that really speaks to the power of the system and what is possible when you reorganize how the brain is responding to language. The child's reading scores have the ability to really skyrocket when the brain is prepared to learn language in the way that it was intended. So, if you're curious to dig more into like the effect sizes of accelerated student learning and what we know about good educational statistics, feel free to check out this link here. This is a meta-analysis from John Hattie, which will kind of dive into all of those things more specifically. But I think the big message is that closing the gap for a child with dyslexia is critical. So I'm sure that this is not unfamiliar to you, but children with dyslexia have often stayed in the same place year after year after year. And while their classmates are making that typical growth from grade level to grade level, often these children do not make the growth because they're not doing things to get to the heart of what the real issue is. And so the heart of this issue is that the brain isn't functioning in the same way that a typical brain would use language. And so when you help the brain to actually use those same portions of the brain and do what a typical reader does, you have the opportunity to make massive changes. And if you don't, there is inevitably things that are missed. And so there are missed opportunities, which means that you might not get to do a sport that you wanted to do, or join a club that you really wanted, or take a class that you really liked. Or there's social things, like maybe everybody got to have an ice cream party and you had to go down to your intervention class every day for 30 minutes and miss out on those opportunities. But there are inevitably things that are missed. There are current and ongoing struggles, whether those are academic or they are social. Those things continue to persist, and it's almost like it's a traumatic experience day after day going to school sometimes. There can be future opportunities that are missed because you don't have access to the same type of learning or courses or materials or jobs that you may have otherwise if you could read and spell well. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that it's not just the child with dyslexia who suffers in this, it is everybody that is in that child's sphere. So you had better believe that as a mother of a child who is struggling to read, you do not always sleep very well, and you are up in the night and you are researching and you are doing everything that you can do to try to figure out how to solve this problem for your child, which leads to anxiety and frustration and all kinds of struggle that you might not have to do if you were able to close the gap quickly. It can have an impact on other children in the home because of how much energy and effort is required to get that child through homework or to help them out with certain things that they're unable to do on their own. You can't spend the same time as everybody else, which can lead to animosity and struggles there. It can cause stress in the marriage. I mean, there's just a lot of things that can happen, and people who also suffer. So it's not just the child with dyslexia that has these struggles. But when you can massively shift, so when you look at what was happening to Jay before, didn't feel comfortable reading out loud, didn't want to engage, wasn't able to access the material in class, to now reading on grade level, this closing of the gap for him increased his academic performance. It increased his self-esteem and confidence. It, led to better mental health outcomes, greater access to opportunities. It just has this snowball effect in a very, very positive way. So if the intervention that you are doing right now is not making you statistically significant progress and you feel like you're spinning your wheels and you're not getting anywhere, I think it's time for you to really evaluate that and say, have we chosen the right tools? So at this point, I would like to just invite you to two opportunities that might be of help. If you are sitting in the audience right now and you're saying, boy, I don't even know if dyslexia is really what we're dealing with. I just am kind of trying to learn more because I suspect that that's what this is. I would invite you to join our Dyslexia Discovery Workshop. And so it's a course for you that gives you all of the behavioral indicators as well as 3 assessments that you can give your child in 20 minutes. And then you'll have the certainty to know for sure if that's really what your child is dealing with or not. And sometimes just having that certainty can help you to make better plans and next steps. And so please let us know if you need support, and we'd be happy to get you included in our dyslexia discovery workshops. In addition, if you are already at that point where you know the school's plan is not working, like we are in a small group and it's not really tailored to my child's needs and we're not making any progress and we've been doing this for years and it feels like we're going insane, or they've been going to tutoring once or twice a week and they're making minimal to any progress, or you're trying to homeschool and you have no idea how to just get from one day to the next. I think that a good next step for you is to book a complimentary call with our team. So we are happy to get on with you and just really help dive into your child's specific case. What is their data? What have you been going through? And we can let you know whether or not you would be a good candidate for this type of support. But the bottom line is that I hope that this inspires you to know what is possible. You do not have to live with the belief that your child with dyslexia has to struggle and suffer with reading struggles forever. I hope that if you've been with us for a while and you've been joining these celebrations every other week, you start to see that, like, oh my goodness, well, today's child was 9 and last week's child was 7 and the week before that it was 14 and the kid that they've got, next is 11 and 16. We've got clients that are all the way from age 5 to adults, and it's possible for all of them to have statistically significant progress. And so I just want to thank you for being here and for celebrating that opportunity of what is really possible for these amazing kids. And so I want you to just give it up for Jay and Kate, who have done an absolutely fantastic job inside of this system. Kate, you have changed his world, turned it upside down for the positive, and we're just so celebrating you. So thanks everybody for joining us today. Please feel free to join us again in 2 weeks where we will be celebrating another one of our client graduates. Thanks.